There's a story about a university student who was incredibly smart. He got good grades on all assignments, quizzes, and exercises. There was only one final exam left in his class, which was worth 50%, and he needed to get only 1% to pass. The day before the exam, he didn't study at all. He just stayed home, watched Netflix, went to bed. The next morning, he went to the exam room and he told his friends he had an awesome strategy for this exam. And the exam was all multiple choice, by the way. He sat down, opened the exam booklet, didn't even read the questions. He just circled letter C all the way down. He was done in 2 minutes, left the room with a big smile on his face. I'll definitely get at least few right, he thought to himself. This student failed the course. The final had true or false questions only. So the moral of this story is that you gotta know the structure of the exam before you come up with a strategy for it. Let's talk about the structure of day 2. It has one 5-hour comprehensive case testing you on FR, MA, and your role. There will be no other competencies. Every single required in day 2 will be either FR, MA, and your role. Out of FR and MA, you could be tested on FR only, MA only, or a mix of both. Think of it this way. Day 2 typically has 13 AOs, and about 8 of them will be on your role. The remaining 5 could be on FR only, or they can be on MA only, or a combination of both. CPA Canada likes to change things up every year, so we don't really know what FR and MA combination you're going to get, but here's the historical trend of what AOs came up in the past day 2s. So you can see it's been mostly FR, but don't get your hopes up if you're not an MA fan. Either can come up and you should be ready for both. Alright, let's look at the role component for a moment. Your role is the area you want to specialize in. You can choose any of the electives to be your role, which are assurance, tax, finance, or PM. But does it make sense to choose something that you're not good at? Probably not. That's not smart. It's better to choose the role that you're most comfortable with, and it's probably going to be one of the electives you took. For example, if you took electives PM and finance, you probably want to choose your role to be either PM or finance. If you took the electives assurance and tax, you probably want to choose the role to be either assurance or tax. A quick side note here, candidates who want to open their own practice after getting designated must take assurance as their role. This is one of many requirements to obtain a public practice license. If you're someone thinking about opening your practice, you should have already taken assurance as your elective, and you should choose assurance as your role. Alright, so the number one goal with day 2 is to achieve depth. What does depth mean? If you remember from the earlier chapter about the structure of CFE, depth means discussing each issue in detail. It means calculations, explanations, and details. You can think of depth like the grade C, competent. Your goal with day 2 is to get as many C competent grades as possible. Getting NA or NC is useless. Even getting RC is kind of useless. Your goal is to get C. The reason is the way days 2 and 3 are marked. You can only pass CFE by accumulating a lot of C's in your depth area. This threshold, which I'll talk more about in the passing profile lesson, doesn't consider NAs, NCs, not even RCs. So getting those in day 2 doesn't add a lot of value. This raises a question, how difficult it is to get C's? How difficult are the AOs in day 2? It may be best explained through an example. Here's your day 2 FR AO from CFE 2018. Hit pause to read it in detail. Let's look at that appendix. What do you notice? It's quite complicated, right? Take a look at the length, take a look at the tables and numbers, take a look at the complexity. If you were to compare this to an FR issue on day 3 case, it's nowhere near this length and complexity. Now, technically speaking, this is actually not a hard issue to tackle, it's just very time consuming. You need to get a C, so you have to write a lot of details, and this takes time. So the message is, practice so much that case writing becomes second nature, you can tackle this kind of issues within the time limit and enough detail to get a C. Here's another example. This is a managerial accounting AO from past day 2 case. Here's the appendix related to this AO. Again, very lengthy, very detailed, very time consuming. I'll show you later templates, formats, and technical methods you can use to answer these questions. So if you feel overwhelmed right now, don't worry about it. You'll learn how to approach and solve these kinds of questions. This is just to set your expectations that day 2 requires in-depth writing. You can see why candidates find day 2 to be so challenging. Getting C is quite difficult. It means you have to find the right requires, write a lot of detail, do solid quants, and write support recommendations. All this takes a lot of practice and a lot of time. Even though the case is 5 hours long, your time evaporates quite quickly. The only good news in all this is that the requirements are easy to spot. They're very explicit. The users directly tell you what they want you to do. Another thing to keep in mind is that the FR and MA issues will be tested at the core level and the role will be tested at the elective level. So the role will be tested at the same level of difficulty as you had in your electives. Lengthwise, the Day 2 case is about 40 pages long. You heard me right, 40 pages. You should expect to write about 10 to 15 pages, not counting the Excel quants. Let's go through a sample Day 2 case. On the front of the booklet, you'll see the exam regulations. You just have to sign and put your candidate number. When you flip to the first page, this is what you'll see. It explains that there's a common component and a role component. The common component has requires on FR and or MA, and the role component has requires only on the role. As the name implies, the common component is same for everyone. It's common everyone in Canada. It doesn't matter what your role is, you will have the same exact FR and or MA issues to tackle. As you can see, the index here shows which appendix refers to which component. For example, appendices 1 to 3 are for the common, while appendix 4 is for the role. As you can also see, there are 4 appendix 4s, one for each role. This means you'll need to refer to your role only, ignore all other roles. So even though the exam is about 40 pages long, you end up using about 20 pages of the exam, which are the common background information, the common appendices, and your roles appendix. After index comes the background information. It talks about the company structure, ownership details, stakeholders and users, gives you various dates and what the current challenges are. We'll learn a little later that a good strategy is to skip the background information and come back to it later because most of the stuff here is kind of useless. After the background, you'll see the requirements for your role. Since the exam has 4 different roles, all of them will be attached to the exam booklet. The order is always assurance, finance, PM, and taxation. You have to read only your role's requirements. For example, if you're writing PM, skip all the requirements, even paperclip them together so they don't get in your way, and jump to your requirements only. If you look at the index again, you can clearly see how the roles requirements are organized. Assurance, finance, PM, and taxation. After the role requirements, you'll have the common information or common appendices. There are usually 3 to 7 common appendices. For example, here's the index from CFE 2017, and CFE 2018, and CFE 2019. The typical pattern is that Appendix 1 is additional business and company information, Appendix 2 is excerpt from the draft financial statements, and Appendices 3, 4, 5, even 6 or 7 depending on the CFE are the common FR and or MA required that you need to tackle. And the final appendix is the role appendix. Interestingly, there's always one role appendix, but don't let it fool you. It's divided into smaller sections and you gotta tackle several issues, not just one. Here's another thing that you may find interesting. In the final role appendix, you may actually have an issue that has nothing to do with your role. For example, you may get an FR or MA issue in your role appendix which has nothing to do with your role. Here's an example. This is a role requirements appendix from assurance role from CFE 2019. This is asking us to take care of some FR issues. It says she would like you to assess the accounting for the foreign currency transactions, the revenue from the car sales made under the new marketing program, the K3 press contract, the future dismantling of Elkar's battery construction facility, and the recently acquired high-value artwork. For the last one, the high-value artwork, the details are at the role appendix as is shown in here. So your role appendix may not always have issues related to the role itself. You may see an FR and or MA issue discussed there. The strategy is to simply write about them in the FR or MA section of the outline. Just treat them as an FR or MA issue and talk about them in those sections. Alright, so to summarize this lesson, Day 2 case is 5 hours long. There will be no competencies other than FR, MA, and your role. This means that all the tough technicals like Section 85 rollover, sale of assets and shares, or acquisition of control, unless your role is tax, unless you're specializing in tax, don't spend time learning these topics. They may be tested on Day 3, but it's going to be at the core level, which means it will be shorter, easier, and simpler. Your goal with Day 2 is to get C or competent in as many AOs as possible, and your strategy is to write details, discussions, and calculations. The structure of Day 2 is that it starts with an index, then background information, then requirements for your role, the common appendices, and lastly the role appendix. These are the key things for the Day 2 blueprint. Look at the specifics at the approach chapter. Let's take a look at the Day 3 blueprint and to see how it compares and contrasts with Day 2.